Clicking the button now.
Welcome to your awakening. Please take all as your reality is adjusted.
Oh, welcome to your lagging feedback loop. As the YouTube feed finally starts going. From my perspective anyway, it takes several seconds at least before I see the YouTube stream actually active. So, hello, welcome back once again to the wrong tab. I want that one, right? We'll get there eventually. Stop screen sharing. Yeah, done with that. Thank you all for now. Hello, folks. Welcome back once again to another edition on this moon day evening of Sol Excalibre, the light reflecting off the moon day, a day for reflection. My corona, my corona, flicking through tabs. Hello, everyone in the chat room. Thanks for joining us. Come on, lag, catch up. Got a little bit more lag than usual tonight. I've heard a few people mention that the internet might slow down a little bit more as things are progressing. And at the moment, it's not too bad. It's lagging behind a little bit, but it's keeping up just about. Hello to everyone in the chat room. Thanks for joining us. Tazzy, hello in the chat. And Lotsum Tatsro, hello. And scrolling down. New Being, hello. Thanks for joining us. And Reality Chat, you in the room. And Steve, hiya Steve. Thanks for joining in. Steve the Goose, hello. And Stewie, hello. And I'll try and come back to the chat room in a bit. I'm sure there'll be other people joining in at some point. I might cough a little bit, hopefully not as bad as I've been. I've been getting better slowly day by day, getting back to approximately where I was before, which, considering my condition, is like lacking lung function. But yeah, I've been a lot worse over the last couple of weeks, but I'm getting back there eventually. I might cough a little bit, I might run out of breath a bit, but hopefully I should be able to blather at you for at least several minutes for a while. If you've been tuning in before and you've heard me ranting and rambling before, you know what I mean. I talk at length sometimes, so having that occasional time where I'm running out of breath, it gives you a breather from me rambling. Anyway, right, screens, where's all my screens? That one. Okay, I'll put in the chat box tonight, underneath in the chat box, in the info box under the video description, the way I usually do. It's kind of like a subtitle title to the episode. And this week is nothing to do with crown virus and zombie locusts eat 130 billion digits. Yeah, we're going to talk about some things that have been saturating the news, and it's certainly well past the time when this topic, this point of conversation has been done to death. We're in that saturation period. They talk about containment and stuff like that, their process of how they deal with outbreaks. And in the same manner, we could talk about that in relation to the information and how for the past several weeks now we've been saturated with the, I don't want to call it fear porn. I know that is part of it, and that's part of the deliberate reasoning of it, but it's just the sheer continuous carrot on a stick effect of, how many cases is it today? How many people have died today? What's the next area that's been shut down, etc.? And this constant tripping people forwards in that anxiety of, do I panic yet? Is it time to panic now, or maybe tomorrow do I start panicking, or the day after do I start panicking? When am I allowed to start panicking? And this is some of what I've mainly wanted to try and talk about tonight, rather than, as a lot of this seems to have been deliberate, and we talked about in other ways before over the years, of how they will use or create argumentation based on pedantic and semantic arguments over details, and they encourage people to quagmire themselves into those kind of polarizing arguments. So rather than looking at the results, the actual observable, provable results, traceable facts, paper trail of evidence, etc., people end up arguing about, well, do you have it? Don't you have it? Is it even real? Is it a creation out of a lab? Is it a bioweapon to do this, that, or the other? Well, you know, all of the hideous aspects of speculation that are worth consideration, but after multiple weeks of the media encouraging people to do that, it becomes an example of how they are getting people to fixate on little bits of information and arguments over details that don't actually help them make any progression in terms of dealing with the problem. The UK government has for a very long time, maybe I should say the British government, just to be pedantic. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. See how many non-PC phrases we can fit in before the end of the show. The British government has always been very good at repeating the mantra of keep calm and carry on, keep calm and carry on. So much so that it's become a cliche about British culture that has been around for many decades. You know, it's that cliche of the British Empire: keep calm, carry on, stiff upper lip, just bear with it, keep going, it'll be over soon. The British government is very good at that. And the current hyper-normalized internet age political spectrum that we're presented with, and the political theatre that we're presented with, is really, really good at doing that. Creating spin and divesting responsibility and putting it onto a third party, which is the kind of stuff I was talking about last week, or putting it onto a completely unknown and innocent party, of suggesting basically the victim is to blame. They do a lot of this kind of reversal inversion psychology, where they make the victim the one to be blamed, not the actual culprit who is carrying out the offence or creating the violation, the violent act. No, it's your fault that we have to beat you over the head with a stick to make you obey the rules. So, nothing to do with the crown virus. Straight away, I'm sure you could say, like, oh, you're contradicting yourself. You're talking about the coronavirus, and you said in your title, nothing to do with the crown virus. But I wasn't. It was deliberately being, a little bit facetious with the way I was writing that statement, deliberately to make that miscommunication stand out. I'm talking about the coronavirus, but what I'm suggesting with that statement is that as this thing progresses, if they keep following the script as they have done in other countries, then at some point, a lot of us in the UK are going to be in some kind of situation where you're not supposed to be going out. You will either be under some kind of mandatory quarantine, or you'll be under a social peer pressure requirement of self-quarantine. So there is that element of, for a lot of people, they may not know what to do with themselves if they're suddenly told to stop going to work and to stay at home and self-quarantine. So they've got nothing to do. And we're back to that position, that psychological, spiritual position of they've been left with seemingly no purpose. Because within the Matrix world, a lot of the Matrix world is based on that encouragement of the ego self, and then presenting the ego self with a pseudo purpose classically, the cliche of the hamster wheel describes it in a quick and simplistic fashion. For a lot of people, their purpose in life is go to work, earn money so I can pay my bills, buy food, feed the kids, look after the family, go to work, earn money, and it goes on and on and on. And that is their supposed purpose in life, given to them and encouraged by the system that doesn't want them to think about anything else, because then they might become spiritually self-aware or consciously aware of how the illusion of authority that the state claims over them is just that, an illusion. It's nothing physical other than their use of violence to enforce that claim of authority. So putting people in a position where they have time to think about stuff because they've got nothing else to do could actually backfire a lot on a lot of the system's attempts to manipulate people. But to amplify the potential anxiety and to keep that carrot on a stick, that infected carrot on a stick, leading people to the next day, the next day, the next day. Keep calm and carry on. Panic tomorrow. Do your job today. You can panic tomorrow. You don't need to, worry about it for now. Just keep going back to work, folks. To amplify that anxiety, they're now talking on a regular daily basis about how the economies are being affected by the rolling out of this pandemic, not a pandemic. It's not officially a pandemic yet because the NGO that is somehow in charge of all this stuff hasn't declared it as a pandemic yet. But it is a pandemic because we keep telling you how it's spreading all over the world, and you're probably going to end up getting it, and there's nothing we can really do to stop it. So isn't that the definition of a pandemic? You end up in a semantic argument over details of the definition of what is or is not a pandemic. So this pandemic, not a pandemic, is already affecting the financial markets and the economic system. And mentioned this a few times over the past few weeks of how there would be a knock-on effect once the logistics of the just-in-time delivery system, which is a global network system, it's not just in time from the warehouse down the road from you. It's just in time from the production factory, which is probably in another country somewhere else on the planet from you. And there is that logistical time of it being produced and shipped, transported to where you are, and then distributed from that localized distribution warehouse. So it seemed pretty obvious to me that at some point, considering the extent of limitation that China had allegedly, supposedly put upon itself, shutting down entire cities, which of course stopped production of certain goods, that has a knock-on effect through that whole interlaced trade system. So, of course, it seemed obvious to me that eventually you're going to see that knock-on effect appear in the financial markets. And a few weeks, a couple of months really, considering they announced it at the beginning of December or midway into December. Now the news is starting to obsess on that fact. The reality is, the fact is that the stock markets and both the winners and the losers, in the sense of the stock markets have gone down a lot, but there's certain elements of the industrialized, commercialized system that will be benefiting from this. So those people who produce toilet roll, if you've got dividends in a company that makes toilet rolls, you'll be making bank, as they say. As people go out buying loads of toilet roll for, whatever. All of a sudden they think they're going to start pooing more than normal for the next few weeks. I don't know. Anyway, just being silly. The point being, it seemed fairly obvious to me there would be knock-on effects into the financial markets. And now the system is using that as propaganda to push home this concept that the entire global system is interreliant already. It's not something that's going to happen in the future. It's not, oh, globalism's coming at some point, folks. We've been globalized in that commercialized industry for a long time, for at least a couple of decades. So it's creating a kind of knockback effect to cause those countries that are being hit heavily, or those that think they will be hit heavily, are starting to contract, both in terms of their financial participation in the global marketplace. So like today they announced the FTSE, the FTSE, which is the UK's main trading exchange, lost 130 billion. I can't remember if they said euros or pounds. In my statement, like in the subtitle, I put 130 billion digits, because what you're talking about is digits on a screen in that computer system of the global market trade exchange money magic system that they have. 130 billion in one day is a big hit for that market. They talk in their video presentations, their video news packages, they're talking about how it's similar to what occurred in 2008. It's near enough the same kind of line that it's dropping to. So of course that leads to talk about a new recession. So not only have you got this implied fear that you might catch the virus itself, and then you got that, like I say, argument about whether you do have it. Is it even real? Is it just the flu? Just because you've got it, does that mean you're going to die? Are you one of the people that have to self-quarantine? All these questions that can be argued backwards and forwards. And on top of that now, you've got this suggestion that the financial situation might crash again and we'll have the beginnings of a new recession, or a furtherance of the recession that never really ended after 2008. And what's been going on for the last decade plus 11 years, isn't it, is actually another illusionist trick of them artificially inflating the markets, adding value into it with their quantitative easing systems, which is basically just print more money, print more money, print more money. And then you've got the shrinkflation element and attempts to deliberately divert people away from what could I call it, old paradigm shopping, of actually going to a store where you go in a shop and buy goods off a shelf or from behind a counter, and instead encouraging people towards the new internet reliant online ordering system where it will be delivered to you, at the moment by human operator, but in the near future by drone operations. So I'm digressing a little bit from where I was. The main point really I wanted to get at was the amplification of what they themselves called the infodemic. Jeff C's done quite a few good videos on this point recently, and it's something we've been talking about for the past few weeks, and certainly since this became a main news filler, that it was obvious they were going to pile on with this like they've done with other outbreaks, like the Ebola outbreak, etc. But they themselves are pushing this idea of the infodemic. I did keep a video open. I'll just put the link in the chat box if people want to watch it. I thought about screen sharing some of it, but it's a few minutes long and there's only one or two little bits in it where it's relevant really to what I'm talking about. Yes, if I just do a screen share of the video page so you can see what it's called and whatever. Don't need to do audio. This was on Sky News. Put the multitasking, put the link in the chat box if it will let me. Yes, hopefully that will work. If you really feel the need to watch it. As I said, it's a few minutes long, it's nothing major. And this is a really good example of modern news spin and controlling the narrative using the media outlets that most people would refer to as mainstream news. Sky News is mainstream news, not just for the UK, but a lot of other countries get Sky television services, news services, etc. And this is the title of it is Coronavirus, the Misinformation Outbreak. And I've seen at least a couple of other video packages covering the same points over the last several days that are basically referring people again and again to this concept that was talked about and pushed very hard in that Gates Foundation funded Event 201 pandemic game theory event practice that they did. Event practice, you know what I mean? Sort of like tabletop game theory stuff that they do. This idea of the infodemic, or controlling misinformation. And that's primarily what that video package was about. I'll stop screen sharing that because I don't want to sit looking at his ridiculous face for more than a few minutes. But just the title alone, Coronavirus, the Misinformation Outbreak, hopefully give you the idea of what it's about. And if you listen to it, there's just a couple of things in there that he mentions that I think if you pay attention to what's being said, stand out clearly as being an outright statement of how the government and the corporate supposed private business system, the corporatocracy, was revealing itself, is actively working towards controlling the information that is moving around the internet. So as he says in their little examples, if you go to a platform like Instagram and you type in corona or coronavirus, straight away you'll be presented with a link to the NHS UK website. So in other words, the big corporate platforms are doing exactly what the government wants in terms of squashing any what they would consider unofficial or bad speech, talking about the information or questioning it, or talking about how to help yourself, how to cure yourself, how to protect yourself from the virus, and all these kind of discussions. And instead directing you to authoritative, standardized outlets. This is, in a metaphorical sense, this is martial law for information being applied. Because every bit of information has to go through a checkpoint where it's required to show its papers. And is it allowed, or does it have a permission slip to go into that area of the rest of the internet's discussion? Is it allowed to go into that forum? And what goods is it carrying? They want to check the back of the wagon and see if you're carrying any illicit data that might suggest things like vitamin C is good for boosting your immune system, so it helps you fight off viruses. Just simple stuff. Vitamin D, getting out in the sunshine, getting some good sun in your system to help your own biology. These kind of snippets of information, if they don't come from official sources and have the correct pass, the correct paperwork, they're not allowed through those checkpoints. And the same is applied to the viewer, the audience, the citizens who are trying to make use of those platforms to ask questions or find out information. So it's just a clear example. I've been trying to do this more this year, sort of trying to take things that are going on in the world, and certainly in terms of the media, and use them as clear examples of how this is now the new reality of what's being done around you. This is no longer, let's talk about conspiracy theories of what might be happening in the future. We can still, we often do, speculate about stuff in the future, but I want to spend more time pointing out these clear examples. If you are able to dispassionately observe them as data points, if you can help yourself by not overreacting. I'm not suggesting you should never react with emotion. You shouldn't deny your emotions completely, but don't allow your emotions to lead the charge, because a lot of what they rely on is that kind of fear factor, that emotional knee-jerk reaction to get people to react without thinking clearly, so that you're more likely to follow their carrot on a stick temptation to lead you in the direction they want you to go. So he talks about in that video how they are working with private businesses and how the system is being utilized now, this modern version of the internet, this contemporary version of the internet as we know it, to make use of it, is being controlled to such an extent that they can successfully monitor and divert the information that is being shared over the internet to do with particular topics of choice. So the keywords that they require, coronavirus, etc. So one clear example of how the propaganda and the spin is being repeated to encourage people to accept that this is now how it will be. If you're told by the mainstream news, by the authority outlets repeaters, that your government says there is a new outbreak of such and such and such and such, you have to accept that information. And if you start trying to find out whether it's even true in the first place, or you look for corroborating or contradicting information to back it up, etc. In other words, if you critically think and ask questions and think for yourself, then your ability to move around on the internet will be curtailed. It will be chaperoned. Now, the other element, going back to the point about nothing to do with the crown virus, and you've got nothing to do now because you're going to get quarantined. And I'll caveat myself, as I do so many times in the past, and people just don't seem to want to listen. I'm not suggesting that this thing is real or is not real. You know, can argue endlessly about the details of the virus and whatever. And I'm not suggesting that people should panic about what they're being told by the news media. But, caveat done with, but let's talk about how behind the fear porn effect of the saturation that the mainstream propaganda is pumping out, keeping people on this constant, refresh, how many cases is it now? How many died now? Do I panic yet? Is it at my doorstep yet? So I need to start panicking. And looking at the clear data, the unbiased, non-emotionally corrupted data of the realities of what's happening based on the justification of this alleged virus outbreak, pandemic, not pandemic, places are being shut down. I live in the East Midlands, not far from me, in one of the towns nearby, several miles away from where I am, but that's nearby really. A school was shut down over the weekend because a teacher there was tested positive. At the moment, the British government is not making any mandatory statements saying that places must be shut. As I said earlier, they're repeating the mantra of keep calm, carry on, keep calm, carry on. They're leaving the choice of whether places shut down or quarantined to the place itself. So the schools decide for themselves. And that's an example of that redirection of culpability, that third-party shield. The government can now sit back and say, oh, sorry, your life was disrupted because now you got to look after your kids because they're not at school during the day. But we didn't make that decision. The school itself made that decision. I know it's a bit panicky, pedantic, basically. But this is the kind of litigation society we now live in. They're protecting themselves from being culpable or being prosecuted for being the ones that made the decision that school shut down and the knock-on effects because of that. As you may very well be aware, I'm sure a lot of people are, because it's so saturated on the news media, Italy announced over the weekend that it's locking down large areas of the population in the north part of the country, such that it's, I think, 16 million plus people are in mandatory quarantine, which again is just spin, it's language spin to basically say martial law, under curfew via martial law. They're using a medical justification, quarantine, to stop the spread of the disease, the virus, I should say. So, but it is in effect medical martial law. So whether you like it or not, those people in that area are now under quarantine. I saw the news about a lot of people leaving the area as quickly as they could when the news would have leaked out that the quarantine was going to be put in place. And this is based on, I think their numbers were over 200 deaths now in Italy, allegedly, according deaths caused by the virus. So here in the UK, under the British government, they keep repeating the mantra, keep calm and carry on. As this illness, this virus has spread further northwest across Europe, you can see how the panic effects are starting to come out in the public, no matter what the governments are saying. So in France now, there's reports of panic buying, as there has been in Italy. People, stocking up on toilet roll because, when you're ill with a virus, that's the main thing you want is toilet roll. But this level of gaslighting that is being performed by all the governments that are participating in this narrative about this virus and its spread and blah, blah, blah. They gaslighting the public by getting the mouthpieces, the spokesholes of the propaganda mainstream media, the BBC, the Sky News, the Reuters, etc., to keep pumping out this, be afraid, folks, this virus is coming, it's going to get you, but don't panic. Keep going back to work. Keep doing what the government tells you to do. Don't worry about it. Be afraid. Don't worry about it. Don't worry. Classic gaslighting. So you're getting that reaction in the public of some people are going, fuck this, I'm going to get in the store before everybody else does and grab all the toilet roll before it all sells out. And even to the extent of that kind of, extreme commercial desire of people wanting to physically fight each other over these kind of goods, these commercial goods. And a lot of the delays in the supplies of the commercial goods are because of that just-in-time international global network of supply chains. Do you see how all these things are coming together? You're going to have nothing to do with the coronavirus, because once it gets to your area and they start announcing mandatory quarantines, which potentially will come to the UK, potentially it's going to happen in every country. Yeah, I say potentially. I'm speculating a little bit into the near future. But I think here in the UK, we've got at least another week, possibly 2 weeks to go before, if the progression carries on as the numbers have been going, before the progression here reaches the same kind of numbers as it did in Italy, where they decided to implement the quarantine. So, as I say, not fear-mongering, not trying to amplify that fear effect. But if this keeps being perpetuated by the state system, which I think it's highly likely that it will because it serves so many purposes for them, then it's going to be a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, 3 at the most, before we start hearing here in the UK that they're going to start shutting down certain areas or curtailing events, curtailing movement of people, so that they try to supposedly contain the spread of the disease. Medical experts, there's been a lot of experts being brought on the TV over the last few weeks. But medical experts suggest that it's already past containment stage. And I think, considering that you can see the way the numbers are spread across the world, even if you take the numbers as being a very conservative point of view, as in they don't want to tell you the worst case scenarios, for example, then it's pretty obvious that, yeah, we're already past the stage of containment. And the fact that in a lot of countries, they haven't really made any major effort to curtail movement of people, etc. Yeah, maybe that's a good thing if it is all bogus and hype and fear porn deliberately created, etc., etc. But it also means the narrative, as they're playing it out, is going to enable them within the next couple of weeks to take it that next stage further and go, oh, well, it is a pandemic, not a pandemic, folks. Maybe you should panic a little bit now. Now you've got to stay at home, and we'll have to start talking about how we bring supplies to you, because you won't be allowed to go to the shops like you used to. You'll have to order it online. They've already started supposedly to have negotiations about whether some of the big supermarket chains will deliver for free. If people are in self-quarantine, they won't charge you a delivery fee, basically, to bring your shopping to you. All these kind of elements are starting to build up and will start to emanate within the next couple of weeks here in the UK. I think it's going to be slightly different in each different country. As I mentioned earlier, in France, they're getting to the stage now of having emergency meetings, and the people of France have already started to decide for themselves, even though they're being encouraged by that news media spin. But people are already starting to get into that mindset of being one of the zombie locusts that is heading out to grab what they can before the rest of the locust swarm turns up. So as an example of how things are factually, provably, dispassionately, observably shown by the data that you're being presented with behind the propaganda spin, the governments are using this narrative as an excuse to implement various levels of tyranny that have not been part of our society for a long time, not really until wartime, during the Second World War, where it was implemented for the reasons of the war. But we're going to start seeing more impositions in that fashion, and you're going to start to see that as the emanation of what I usually refer to as the New World Order. I know a lot of people have problems with that phrase or the term and what it's supposed to mean, etc., etc. But it is a new paradigm of technological dystopia. It's the easiest way, I think, most accurate way to describe it. This use of a medical reason, a medical justification, gives them, in a lot of the public's mind, gives them the perfect justification to enact a lot of legislation and restrictions on society that people would not have allowed before without this justification. There's no way they would have put up with it. They would not, even the stiff upper lip effect would not have kept people at home obeying these rulings unless it was under this fear threat of this pandemic, not a pandemic. As another sort of example to back that up, this is a little bit of an element of spin, though, but I think the fact that they're using this rhetoric within their spin demonstrates the purpose of the narrative, or demonstrates the reasoning for writing the narrative in this fashion. I've heard it from UK ministers and other talking heads, experts and whatever. I've heard it from the same from other countries. So, so-called experts and talking heads on news media and whatever, saying how great it was the way China carried out its quarantine procedure. Now, they were talking about how wasn't it great the way, China really got in there and set up the enforced quarantines and contained the spread of the virus. And in other words, wasn't it great how China used its tyrannical, authoritarian control infrastructure to quarantine, to martial law control its own populace? That's the rhetoric they've been injecting into. It's not in every news piece, because most of the news pieces are trying to get people to fixate on the number of deaths. Watch the numbers, folks. Are you rolling the dice? You're going to die, yeah? But in the midst of that, there are these other pieces, like the one I showed the screenshot of, which is trying to get people to accept the new authoritarian control over information, because we've got to be afraid of the misinformation. The misinformation is more deadly than the virus. And at the same time, putting these ideological suggestions, planting these seeds based in a similar narrative that we've talked about in previous shows for the last several months, of how there's been this constant drip, drip, drip suggestion of, well, we can do away with some of the population. You know, if we kill half the population, we've still got half left. You know, all these kind of ideological nudgings towards accepting that the government will need at some point to get rid of portions of the population. Certain demographics are expendable. This is the same ideological thinking that became the evil enemy during the Second World War. This kind of eugenics ideology that some people are just not worth saving, and they are expendable, and they are a drain on society. So therefore, if they get killed off in some fashion, oh well, they can be turned into Soylent Green magic burgers. Yeah, why waste that meat? You know, you might have seen over the past few months these kind of ideas being presented in news articles, even if the news article is sometimes labelled an opinion piece. It's part of the news media culture. I'll try and get to the end of what I wanted to say now that I'm starting to lose my voice. I got a good 40 minutes out of it so far, so obviously I'm getting better. I'm not dead yet, I'm getting better. So, looking at these demonstrable, provable facts that you can see for yourself when you observe the patterns and look for the data points that can be corroborated. It's not just the spin and propaganda. These are things you can actually see happening in the world around you. Depending on where you live in, you might see this this effect more overtly, as in you might have been to your supermarket and seen empty shelves. You know, you might not see it as much. Where I'm living, I haven't seen much of people running around in any kind of panic. I haven't seen anyone wearing masks. I haven't seen any empty shelves in the local stores or anything like that. If anything, the shops seem to have been a little bit busier over this last weekend, which could be an indication of people stocking up, but not panic buying. I haven't seen anything like that around here. But you're going to see these effects. These are observable things that you can corroborate for yourself in many ways. I see the effect as it's knocking on into your area. But they keep telling us that this pandemic, not pandemic, I keep trying to think of another way of saying it, but that just seems the most appropriate way of saying it, is going to cause a financial hit. As I said earlier, you know, some areas are going to get quarantines. That is going to amplify that financial hit. So whether you believe the details of the virus itself, even if you think it's a complete hoax and it's all made up numbers, that they're just wargaming the public and gaslighting them with fake information, that's a possibility. I mean, it's difficult for me to find proof of that one way or the other. But in the same way as you could easily say that the virus is genuine, it is out there doing what they say it's doing, infecting people and causing deaths, etc., that doesn't change the reality of what they are implementing based on that justification. So when you see them starting to output news about how the financial markets have taken their biggest hit since 2008, and even the financial experts are talking about how there will be another recession because of the effect of the virus as it's going global, then at what point do you start trying to do some of your own preparation? Not panicking, not panic buying. If you're at the stage of panicking, then either you've left it too late, you didn't listen to the intercom when the Titanic captain told you to get to the lifeboats, you were too busy dancing, or you're reliant on that news media and you're believing that news media so much you're just swallowing everything that they claim is authority. We're speaking from authority. The gaslighting effect means that you pretty much undoubtedly will panic, because that's what they're implementing in the public. They want that panic effect, so that creates the demand amongst the public to say, please come and give us a tyranny, just like they did in China. Please overtly control our lives, our movement, our shopping, our use of cash, our trade exchanges, our information exchanges. Please come and dominate us. So that sort of brings me towards what I wanted to conclude this with. And I know this has been a subject I've talked about many times over the years, and I know it's one that we will come back to again and again. And this is not meant to be an encapsulation to cover all the bases or whatever. There's a lot of information out there that you could work your way through. But the question of prepping, is it a sensible idea to have some preparations done, to do a little bit of prepping for whatever disaster, pandemic, not pandemic, or whatever? Yes, of course it is. A few years ago, as part of the internet psyops that they would do, the psychological operations, and not just the internet, it was in a lot of the news media, so it was a mass operation on the public. But a few years ago, they tried to push this idea that anybody that is a prepper is somehow some kind of extremist, potentially a terrorist, most likely a lone wolf, homegrown, crazy person that is going to suddenly start doing mass shootings or whatever. They tried to make out this idea of prepping was psychologically deranged, and it was absurd. Why would anybody want to be a prepper? Why would you want to keep a month's worth of food in your cupboard? You don't need to do that. There's a food shop right near you. You can order food online. You can get it delivered to your door. The guy will bring you your McJunk burger, straight to your door. Why do you need to have food in your cupboard? There was a lot of push over that point. It didn't really get anywhere, I don't think, because it is a bit of a ridiculous argument, suggestion in the first place. Just anyway, but I wanted to bring that back from the memory pit, from the room 101 hole, to remind people of how, like, now they're doing 180 on that. Now the government themselves are saying, well, actually, it's a good idea to have a few weeks, at least a couple of weeks worth of supplies in your cupboards, folks, because now they can't deny the effect of that just-in-time globalized delivery network supply chain system, because when one thing breaks down in one of those producer countries, there is a gap in that chain that lands eventually over here, and people go to the supermarket and the thing they're after is not on the shelf anymore, and they go, hang on a minute, they told me I didn't need to keep stocks in my cupboard because there would always be supplies. But lo and behold, now a lot more people are learning how, because of that just-in-time delivery system, on average, you have about 3 days supply in your locality. Wherever you live, not far from you, there'll be a little distribution center that acts as a feeder hub for all the supply, the outlets, the different brands, whatever supermarket brand chain it is, plus other, little independent stores or whatever. And they only keep a certain amount in, and it's constantly refed from that long supply chain. So when the supply chain breaks, when you break the trade routes, basically, you've got about 3 days worth of supplies in most shops, in most local areas. And I was being deliberately sarcastic and piss-taking with the way I worded it in the subtitle. The zombie locusts consume 130 million digits. By zombie locusts, I'm implying those kind of people who maybe haven't thought about this kind of stuff ever before, or they're so bought up into the mainstream saturation fear porn that they get in that emotional knee-jerk panic response because they're confused by what the government is telling them about. Oh, be afraid, folks. Oh, don't do anything. Be afraid, don't do anything. Be afraid, don't do anything. So they react in that first thinking of, oh, I need to prepare to be shut in my house for a month. What do I need? Toilet roll. So one of the first things they want to go out and stock up on is toilet roll. You know, you can see all the connectors with things like the hand sanitizer. Obviously, people are trying to make sensible choices of, well, if this is a virus, I want to be able to, you know, clean my hands properly and stuff like that. But the main point is about that just-in-time delivery system is now demonstrated to the general populace of being heavily fallible in terms of dealing with crises that affect the flow of that supply chain. You can then extend that into looking at the international trade dynamics and how China has become the mass producer for most of the Western world, such that, you know, China gets a cold and, oh, look what's happening in the Western world, empty shelves and all that kind of problem. But that is part of the larger game of China being harassed or hemmed in deliberately. Now that the world's got to a certain point, they're ready to progress towards the two-side system, the classic Oceania versus, well, I can't remember the name of the other one now off the top of my head. But yeah, I'll end up digressing into ranting about Orwell. Anyway, the prepping element. Yeah, not so long ago, they tried to convince people that prepping was silly. Now, it's demonstrably obvious to a large portion of the public that actually it's a good idea to have a few weeks' worth of supplies in your cupboard. Doesn't take a lot. We're not talking about having, you know, an underground bunker with MRI rations and you know, all that kind of over-the-top severe prepping. You know, that's like governmental, you know, military prepping kind of stuff. But it's worth having some stuff stocked away in your cupboard and learn to work on a rotation. You know, you use the stuff that's got the oldest date on it and then you replace it and you keep rotating, etc. These are just simple preparation ideas. When you buy toilet roll, don't buy a little 4-pack. Buy a bulk pack. I know if you've got a big family, you know, even the big bulk packs disappear quickly. But it's just that kind of mindset of thinking a little bit in advance and having that confidence that's brought about by the fact that, you know, that, look, even if they turn the power off, if they turn everything off, I can survive for a few weeks. And it's going to give me those few weeks to then assess what's happening in the situation and where do we go from here. It's all very simple Boy Scout stuff, you know. You don't need to wear a silly woggle and a hat and do dib, dib, dib to learn some common sense about just living, surviving in this society. So I just wanted to add that on at the end because I think it's very relevant that for a lot of people, they may not have ever thought about prepping in this kind of fashion. They might have just seen it as that stereotyped, ridiculed pantomime of some, you know, crazy guy living in a bunker with buckets of freeze-dried food for him to poo in, and you know, and he's going to concrete himself in for the next 20 years because of the apocalypse. All that kind of deliberately parodied stereotype, deliberately created stereotypes so that they can use it as a control mechanism to influence your thinking about these kind of situations. Bojo the Clown visited a place that's not far from where I am called Bewdley. And it's a place that I used to go and visit quite a lot when I was younger. I used to just go and hang around in Bewdley. It's a really nice village, a nice little town by the river, and you could sit in the pub and have a drink while you sat by the river and stuff like that. Anyway, he went to visit there because of the floods recently. It was quite appropriately called Traitor by some of the people in the crowd. But he did his usual bimble clown thing of going around going, oh yeah, we'll fix it, keep calm, carry on, we'll fix the problem, don't worry folks, we'll build more flood defences. So pretty soon Bewdley is going to look like it's almost subterranean, because the flood defences will get higher and higher. They'll be creating an aqueduct that runs through the middle of Bewdley, because they're not dredging the rivers like they used to. So the water flow and the height of the water flow is just going to keep getting higher and higher. So they're going to end up having to build an aqueduct that runs through the middle of Bewdley. That will be the flood defences, which they know full well will not have any long-term lasting effect, because they're not dealing with the root of the problem. They're just patching the symptoms in the same manner as they're demonstrating. This is the reason I mentioned this, the same manner that they're demonstrating about how they're supposedly dealing with the outbreak and the spread of the virus. They're not dealing with the root of it. They're patching it because they know it's going to keep flooding in. So as we progress, don't panic and go out running, buying toilet roll. Just buy a few little extra bits every time you go out shopping. If you only shop once a month, then obviously you're going to end up needing to buy a month's worth in one go. But if you go on a semi-regular basis, just buy a few more bits every now and then. Buy some stuff that you can put in the back of the cupboard. Yes, things like toilet roll, buy it in bulk. Buy yourself some cleaning products in bulk, stuff like that. But it's not a matter of panicking will aid you in any way against what potentially the state is going to implement in the near future. If they do bring in a quarantine system, then you, having run around over the last weekend to every superstore you could find so that you could buy 200 rolls of loo roll, that ain't going to really matter much, right? Because if you're quarantined in, then at some point they will have to make arrangements for how you can get further supplies, whether they deliver it or you are required to order it online and they make special arrangements for the delivery to be allowed into the quarantine area or whatever. They will make some kind of arrangements because they'll have to. When they talk about doing this quarantine thing, they cannot get away with, and this is even true in China. In China, they made arrangements for people to either be allowed out to a store. They send a representative of their apartment block out to the store to get all the supplies in one go, or supplies were brought to them. So they'll do the same thing here. So you panic buying, thinking that you're going to be locked in a room and left alone unattended by the entire world for however many weeks. That's not going to be a reality. Very highly unlikely. Yeah. But this is something that is worth consideration. If you've never thought about this kind of stuff before, if you think that the system is so infallible that there's always going to be food there in the shop for you, or you can always use your smartphone to order, stop being so naive. The smartphone could stop working. The delivery agency could go out of business. There's going to be a few businesses that go defunct because of this knock on the financial markets. The supply chain, the just-in-time supply chain might get interrupted, so you can't get those supplies. So just thinking about things like, well, actually, if I sit, how many meals can I make out of what I've got in the cupboard? What do I need to buy so that I have something that can be turned into a meal each day for however many days? And as I said earlier, there's a whole lot of good information out there. If you do want to start, if you haven't thought about this kind of stuff before, and you want to start thinking about looking at information about prepping, there's a whole lot of good stuff out there. You could spend several months just working your way through some of the main stuff. I think I've covered all the points I wanted to mention. And I'm starting to lose my voice, so I'm pretty much done, guys, if you want to jump in.
I was going to say, Cookie, there's two sort of recent stories coming out just in the last few minutes. It says Italy is extending its strict coronavirus quarantine measures, which include a ban on public gatherings, to the entire country. It says Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte said that people would only be permitted to travel for work or family emergencies. And that's one latest story. The other one is that if you're traveling to Israel, it says everybody arriving in Israel will be required to self-quarantine for 14 days to combat the virus. The Benjamin Nutjob has announced. So that's one other story as well that's just come out as you've been talking.
It's not exactly quarantine if they're being allowed out to go to work. Although I know there could be just like a certain amount of lag in terms of them being clear about what they're doing in the news and whatever. But I wonder, do they mean in the sense of if you're performing a job that's what they call it, like an emergency requirement job? You know, you're a medical worker or something like that, where your job is.
I think they mean crossing the quarantine border. Yeah.
Right. So you can go to work if you work in a local area, but you wouldn't be allowed out to quarantine.
Like I say, this is just getting updated as we speak. This is just the latest. And it says in measures, it says here, he said that people would only be permitted to travel for work or family emergencies. He said that measures which come into effect tomorrow were to defend the most fragile members of society. He says Italy's coronavirus death toll jumped on Monday from 97 to 463. It's the worst hit country after China. And he said here in a televised address on Monday, Mr. Conte said the best thing for the citizens of Italy was to stay at home. He added that all sporting events, including football matches, were being suspended nationwide, and that's all that's coming out at the moment. So that's sort of, they're encouraging every single Italian citizen to stay at home unless you've got to go to work or.
The best thing to be right now is a black African, I think. There's not hardly any cases in Africa at all, which reminds me of what KT, the arts degree, was saying, that, there are certain things, genetic reasons why Africans don't get this so much. Yeah. And I'm thinking, that could have been, if it's made in a lab, Madonna was saying not everybody will be affected, and they've been studying people's DNA for a long, long time now. I mean,
an interesting side note on that. I thought about sticking it in my notes, but whatever, mention it now. Bill Gates announced in the news that he's working on a test kit that can be sent out via the post. So like the, DNA kind of test kit, he'll send you a test kit, you send it back to them and they'll test it within 24 hours and let you know if you've got the virus or not. At the same time, getting your DNA. Yeah.
Well, Boris was... I was going to say, Boris was seeing it as a lab today, wasn't he? It was, and saying that he's going to pump another, so many millions or billion, whatever it is. These figures are so huge, and you think, wow, they just find all this money and want to pump it all into these test kits, but apparently they're not going to be available until the autumn. So maybe everybody be dead by then.
I would not touch one of Bill Gates' test kits with a fucking barge pole. I wouldn't put it past the bugger. But anyway.
Cookie, I was thinking about what you were saying about the prepper, and it just sort of sums everything up. They want to equate an alternative view with psychosis and hate. It just summed up in that sort of prepper ideal, that they want to demonise.
Mm-hmm. The way I think the way, or a way to perceive the kind of psychology that they're trying to manipulate and the kind of ideology that they're trying to implement. If you're a prepper, that means you have no confidence in the state being able to provide everything you need. So that lack of confidence means you're automatically an adjutant. Yeah, you're an enemy, basically, because you're doing something that means you disbelieve, you distrust that the state is going to care for you. So they approach the idea of prepping as being a threat. which I think is why they spent so much time trying to convince the public that anyone that's a prepper is automatically a terrorist and shit like that.
So adjacent to like a white nationalist or something, you know?
Yeah. Anyone who speaks against the status quo. This is something that has been a bit more overt in the past several months. Yeah, if you just criticize the government, and again, we've got this reference from China, that we're being told over here in the West, more in the recent months, maybe a couple of years, over the last couple of years, we've been told about how authoritarian China is, to the extent that anyone that even questions what the state is doing usually gets put under house arrest. And since they implemented the social crediting system, that's even more so, such that now there's this list of however many thousands or even millions of people that are not allowed to fly and stuff like that because of their social credit score. Yeah, and apply on top of that now recently that they've put out an app specifically that is designed to decide for you whether you should self-quarantine or not. In other words, the app decides if it thinks you've got the virus and should be quarantined. The level of authoritarian control is demonstrated. You know, and again, it's that gaslighting effect. They've been telling us for however long, you know, oh, look at how authoritarian China is. But then as soon as this virus happens, they're like, oh, China's so great, isn't it? Look at the great job that China did. So in other words, being subjected to extreme authoritarian control is a good thing. You see, that's the suggestion that they're creating, yeah? So the public think, oh, yeah, I want control like that because then we'll know we're safe from the virus. Fucking ridiculous.
Yeah,
Well, look what I just found. Look what I just found. Tea tree oil. I was talking about this ages ago when I had a little fungus infection. A 2013 study found that tea tree oil could prevent the spread of influenza. So all those people that are thinking about hand sanitizers, get into some tea tree oil. Yeah, it's got a really weird pong, but it's quite nice. Yeah. On a positive note, yeah, if I could, I was recommending this the other week, Out of Town with Jack Hargreaves, and here he's
Don't play any of it, run.
No,
just in case, fucking BBC crap.
He's making a skep, which is like he's using one of these. You see, it's a groove thing here. Yeah, I found another thing. The skepist. This is what they look like. These are straw beehives. Yeah, that's the honey in there. Yeah, and so in this thing, he makes this beehive. Yeah, you can watch him making the beehive until he's almost finished. There it is. That's not finished, you see. Because the queen will live in that lower beehive, and all your honeycombs will have little grubs in them. So you put a gauze across that bottom one, and you put a second one on top. And that one there, that will have honeycombs with no grubs in it. Yeah, look like this on the right hand side. Yeah, nice. So anyway, there are 14 episodes of this. Yeah, and the guy just covers some incredible stuff. Yeah,
I'm ashamed to. Well, I'm not ashamed to say, but I remember the original series. It's like wow.
Yeah,
I remember watching bits of it and bobs of it, and I've seen a few come up on YouTube over the years and watched the odd one. But yeah,
there's 14 episodes that this guy has put up recently. Yeah, and I think they're on a DVD. So sort of go and watch them when you can. Yeah. Now, one week he goes out with a lobster fisherman, and they're chucking lobster pots over the side of the boat. And there are 4 guys, and they told Jack, like, you stand there with your camera way back, just keep out of the way, because all these lobster pots, they throw them over the side so fast, and they bring them back in so fast, yeah, that there was a time where a guy got the rope caught around his ankle, it dragged him over the side, took him to the bottom, and by the time they could drag him back up again, he was dead. So, and then the week after, they show this place on the Kentish coast where they're actually keeping lobsters and raising them. And I never knew this, but when a lobster gets so big, it can't grow any bigger because it has an exoskeleton. And it literally has to break the back of its own shell, crawl out, and like for a couple of weeks, yeah, it's really vulnerable. Yeah, it's got no shell at all. And it's during that time that it grows bigger. And then it will grow a bigger shell, and so on and so on, yeah? So some amazing old stuff they do, yeah? And you was mentioning the river, yeah? Like one river down, goes out of Southampton. There are 44 mills on that river. And old Hargreaves tells you that, you know, when they was all running, doing corn, there was only 9 million people living in Britain. So it wouldn't be economical or possible, yeah, to grind all the flour for the country. Now there's a population of 60 million. But I mean, Christ, yeah, that's 44 mills that could be running electricity, but they don't do it, yeah. And when the mills are being kept, yeah, they keep the river.
Yeah,
the people that keep the river.
Yeah, because you need the water flowing, not stagnating.
Yeah, that's right. But, you know, and among them, they rebuild a tidal mill as well, right down by Southampton water, because apparently the water goes both ways, yeah, around the Isle of Wight. So you get really big high tides in the river there, and they used to block it off and use it to run a mill.
Yeah,
some great stuff on there. Yeah, really.
Well, this is all like I said before, because you mentioned this before we come on. It's about not ancient knowledge, but old skills that are literally ancient now, because we have the big corpse and the the robots making everything and whatever. You know, it's completely different, and that sort of information is doesn't get shared a lot anymore. You know.
Oh man, one of them, there was this amazing thing where he tells you about the Belgian, which were people that came into Britain long before the Romans. And he actually shows you a little stone. It's called an iron stone. And these things are actually close to the surface in some places. And all across Kent, yeah, there are these gravel pits, not gravel pits, there are these pits, yeah, that are now ponds for fishing, where they used to dig these stones out to smelt them down and make iron. This was the Iron Age, yeah? And it changed the whole of the south of England, because it used to be forest. But when they came in and they wanted to smelt the iron, they cut the trees down, dig out the iron, and they cut more trees down to make charcoal. And like you say, this is thousands of years old. They was doing that. And these beehives as well, they are a design that is like thousands of years old. You see these on the walls of Babylon.
Yeah,
medieval.
Yeah.
Oh, Babylon, you can see straw beehives. Yeah.
But we live in an age now where everything's done for you, isn't it? Or you don't know where these things come from, or they come on a big cargo ship from China, or something.
There has to be a third party in between. So rather than you doing it for yourself, I know often people try to debunk a lot of what we often talk about in this sense, because they say like, modern stuff is so convenient, it does what you want, it's there when you want it. But it's that same problem like I was talking about with the supply chain. What happens if it's not there? Because sometimes that can happen. Doesn't necessarily need an end of the world of apocalypse kind of stuff. Just things can happen that means there's an interruption in whatever supply chain you're relying on. So sometimes you don't have those things there that you're used to being provided for you. So having the knowledge and the ability to do things for yourself is good backup insurance. If you want to look at it that way, it's backup insurance to be able to cook yourself a meal or whatever, or build your own beehive. But the system wants you to be in a position of reliance on a third party of one kind or another.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of good convenience out of having this system that we have that provides services and products and whatever. But at the same time, that has a debilitating effect on you, not just the individual, but the communities that individuals form. Because if there's not a single person in a community that knows how to do something like that, then you're always going to be reliant on a third party. And that third party creates the economic system, which is the backbone of the whole structure.
And the manipulation comes in with scarcity, what we're seeing now, limiting certain products. Yeah, they've been doing that for a long time. It's interesting thinking about the diamond industry, just and how they've made that into a you know, an expensive market through propaganda and bullshit, because there's warehouses full of them, you know.
Total
So
propaganda.
yeah,
because it's just how much will people pay for it?
Yeah, exactly. And then building up you know, this mindset of it, you know, like I say, it's worth 10 times, 20 times more than it should. You know, you should be paying for it. You know, it's 100 quid, you're paying 2,000 quid, or, you know, because they're plentiful. But that's one example of how they create scarcity, and then people will go out and spend the money and create this huge market, you know, this is, you know, and have all the bling bling and all the rest of it, and that's part of that. But other stuff like food, this prepping thing you're talking about, interesting how that's, like you say, it's come back round. And, you know, we've seen all this, you know, like I say, the latest out of Italy is like they're shutting down Italy, whole country, you know, could be, you know, shut down as of tomorrow, or they don't want anybody to leave. And as you say, it's creeping this way, it's creeping this way. We've seen numbers increase each day. So.
All of those nations that have joined in the narrative, you know, because there's a few places around the world that said, we ain't got no coronavirus, we ain't got any problem with this crap, we don't know what you're on about here. But they are few and far between. Most of them have all joined in, they're all agreeing, they're all participating in the narrative. That means whatever is happening in other countries will more than likely happen here, be implemented here.
Yeah. And another thing, I mean, I put down climate crisis, virus, and now recession. Great, isn't it? 130 billion, you say, digits wiped off the markets today. They're calling today Black Monday. That's it's you know, because it's just going from shitter to shitter to shitter on the markets, as in the amounts that's been.
There's a really big pile-on effect happening at the moment, and I think. I know I've sort of talked about this kind of thing before from an esoteric point of view. This year is when they're cracking the egg. Last year was them heating the egg up, you know, building up that phoenix fire expectation. This year they're cracking the egg. If you think about Corona and the like I say, it's esoteric connections.
Yeah.
But the corona is something that encircles something inside. Yeah, it's an encirclement, a circlet. Yeah. And when you look at an egg yolk, you know, you get the same kind of effect. The yolk is encircled in its own little membrane, like a cell is. You know, they're cracking that yolk now with this coronavirus narrative.
Yeah, and what's bombarding you with climate stuff as well, the climate crisis.
The stock market crashing effect, the problems of the supply chain, etc. Climate change is being added in the accusation that, you know, the climate change has made the coronavirus pandemic possible. They've tried to spin as many narratives into it as they can.
Yeah.
The oil market has gone down dramatically because of a dispute between Russia and OPEC. And at the same time, Russia's had, I did mention this Wednesday on the reality chat, where Putin had his little negotiation with Erdogan. And the situation seems to calm down a little bit. They haven't so much made a statement about any kind of peace plan or peace deal or anything like that, but they've calmed down the extreme rhetoric about fighting each other on the front line in Syria. But Erdogan is still encouraging all the refugees to come towards Greece and into Europe.
Yeah.
You've got all these combining factors as well. They did the usual routine on, I think it was Sky News earlier, talking about Russian bombers coming into or near to UK airspace. And don't miss the fact that even though it's more targeted at the US audience, the audience in the USA, Russia is being blamed for everything, including the coronavirus now as well. Yeah.
Well,
and they're being blamed for the infodemic, the misinformation pandemic. Yeah. All these things are confluencing together and off what could be called a trade war, because the situation based on the effect of the virus with China is in effect the same kind of effect of a trade war embargo. You know, it's like China's had an embargo enforced against it to reduce its income on its sales to the rest of the world. And the rest of the world is suffering the loss of those products that were being produced by China. That's like a trade war effect. So you've got a trade war effect, oil war effect, basically, with OPEC arguing with Russia. Russia's not going to cut down its oil production because it's inculcating. It knows shit is coming, so they're building up their stockpiles in preparation. They're prepping. Yeah. So all these things happening at once, it could very well be a pretext for bigger conflicts happening. But
they just want people in a perpetual state of fear, though, don't they? Fear and confusion. It's like people have been in a state of confusion before this Brexit kicked in. You know, like so it's been that, and then and this sort of the back it. You know what I mean? The timing
on the back of the flooding as well. Yeah, just chaos and confusion in the UK.
Right, so they want you in that reptilian complex of the brain, the brain where you're not making the decisions correctly, you know.
They did sort of they let, how can I describe it? It's not tacitly, but they sort of let slip in some of the rhetoric today that we still actually haven't had Brexit. I can't remember his name, but there's that new young minister that they've been parading everywhere as part of Bojo's cabinet. And he was talking about how the negotiations with Europe were still ongoing about the deal and it might fall through. And if it falls through, then we won't have Brexit. And the way it was worded, the way the rhetoric was worded, I thought, well, hang on, have you just admitted that we didn't have Brexit yet then? So that day that happened at the end of January was all just bullshit, was it?
It was a lie. Well, what a surprise, eh? Are you surprised?
Endless confusion and division. Just endless.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, this refugees thing, I was just watching something recently, and just the Greek island of Lesbos, and I think there's something like there's 23,000 of refugees who are already there. And that camp swelled from 5,000 up to that figure, 20-odd thousand. Yeah. And there's still more trying. There's been people coming in already recently, because of that's the easiest place to get to from Turkey. If you look at the map, it's just there, and it's and it has the biggest refugee or migrant population, and it's mainly Afghanistani. He was saying in this report I was watching, and the Syrians as well, obviously. But what made me think is, these people are just families. You see the pictures, the kids, and you're thinking, well, where would you go if your country's been bombed? Your house or your town. And we've said this many times. You get the fuck out. You go. You get your stuff. You get out. If there's war kicking off and there's people dying in the street. What would you do? And you're not got weapons. You're not. You can't fight back. So you take your stuff and you get the fuck out and you grab what you can and go and take your children with you. And this is some of these people. And it's like, I'm not saying all of them. But there's a small minority of people who are, paraded in the news and give you a false narrative of all this situation, like they're all bad or whatever. And people hate them on the island. This reporter was interviewing both the people who were for and against all this stuff, and but the people who were against it, they're very hateful, and it just creates all this bitterness because they've come onto the island and they're seeing it as being an invasion. And then the other side of it is that people have got some humanity. It was nice to see the humanity side of things and thinking, well, look, who's created all this, getting people to think, and everyone's fighting over this, and migrants are being let in because he's got something like 3 million, hasn't he, there holding something. And that's it. He already let, what was it, in 5 years ago when there was an influx of a couple of million? It was something like that across Europe. Or
that was when his oil deal with ISIS got curtailed.
Yeah. But this is what's been happening. So it's this him using it as a political, using people's lives as a political weapon, or to use these people. It just shows you where people are at. And he's obviously, was he a dictator or supposed to be a prime minister? Is he, or whatever? I don't know. But these guys are always there manipulating literally millions of people's lives in his hands, and just playing. It's just so dark and satanic. I always say this, but it is. This is what people are, this is what we're reduced to, why we've got all the systems we have of all this. Yeah, no, I'm not going to start ranting. I'll shut up anyway. Go on. I'll get into one and I won't shut up for 20 minutes, but yeah, go on.
But it has been what's been going on globally for the past couple of decades.
Yes.
There's been a steady climb, a steady gradual incrementation in what I referred to earlier, like national contraction. Yeah, allies are buddying up more, like Trump trying to reinitiate NATO and them doing their usual G20 meetings and stuff like that, where they play buddy. But at the same time, you can see how, even though globalism has revealed itself to already be in existence, not something that's going to happen in the future, it's already a globalized system. At the same time, you've had this withdrawing in, this pulling in of the boundaries of each of the big nations, where they're trying to secure their own positions.
Yeah.
And to me, I talked about it ages ago as the kind of effect where you can see the growth of empires getting to the stage where all the little satellite nations that still exist are, in one way or another, gobbled up by the bigger empires. So even though they're allowed to exist under their own supposed sovereign name and blah, 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 they're subject to somebody else. Like Saudi Arabia is subject to the British Crown and the whole black nobility infrastructure, yeah? Things like that. This is the globalized modern paradigm. Even though we've got this globalized system, we've still got these big player empire set pieces that are pulling in power and control over resources into themselves, which is usually an indication that they're building up towards conflict. The reason why they're trying to secure all these resources is because they know they're prepping ready for when they're going to have a lack of supply of those things because they're in conflict with the people that used to supply them.
Yeah, I'm just but like I say, interestingly, when you mentioned ages ago now about the fire, the phoenix, the rising of the burning off, and we've got three things, the climate crisis, the virus, and now it seems recession, and this is a knock-on effect, and yeah, sorry, I was go on.
Well, you had the effect onto travel as well. Just, I mean, that in the sense of people just traveling around for whatever their reason, pleasure or just sightseeing, something like that. But that you can see now being heavily curtailed. And that, again, is an example of that kind of national contraction. They want all their people at home ready for when they need to close the gate kind of thing. It's very much, and I haven't mentioned this one for a few years, I think, but I remember ranting about it years ago. It's very much akin to the analogy as presented in the movie Children of Men.
Yeah.
Children of Men, when you look at it from a step back, not just the detail of the storyline of the guy figuring out that he's got to rescue this girl and blah, blah, blah. It's the portrayal of the world environment. That was a microcosm representation of the macrocosm of the world we are entering or have entered. So now we're getting this situation where the border between Greece and Turkey and the movement of those immigrant limbo people, they're living in limbo, basically. They're stateless. That is the macrocosm of what's demonstrated in that storyline in the movie, where borders are heavily controlled and people moving from one area to another are heavily monitored and controlled, and refugees are used as a weapon. This kind of stuff is the example of the global conflict that is occurring, the jostling for positions of power, where war is taking place. But it's not war in a classic conventional sense of tanks and troops on a battlefield. It's economic war, it's resource war, it's trade war. Yeah. And that includes using populations as resource and bargaining chips.
Yeah, so in the Italian government has relented to this massive step of literally shutting down his whole country. Crazy.
That's potentially, again, going to have an even more effect on the economy.
Well, yeah.
Italy's a fairly big economy. I know it's not like up in the top 5 or anything like that, but it still pumps out a lot of value into the economy. It produces a lot of goods that are traded worldwide, so them basically shutting up shop for a period.
Is that one part of the plan though, to crash and or burn some off and create havoc like they did with Greece and other countries over the past 10 years or so?
Force them to sell out. Well, I think we were talking about it last Wednesday. You got that possibility that Italy had been deliberately targeted in the same way as it's highly possible that Iran was deliberately targeted, because they know that the knock-on long-term effects of them suffering from this virus is going to cripple them to such a degree that they can then be gobbled up by the globalized IMF international trade banking system. So they'll be forced, they'll be forced to sell off their assets to the banking institutions.
It was funny that I seen that like a few of the top boys in Iran, like in their cabinet, had get struck down with this coronavirus. I was like,
look at the distance between China and Iran. Interestingly enough, as well, and part of why I mentioned the locusts in my subtitle is like the locusts were going the other direction. Yeah, the locusts came from Africa and have been working their way eastwards into Asia, but the virus supposedly has come out of Asia and been rapidly going westwards into Iran. There's a bit of a distance between China and Iran, but Iran and China do have quite close trade ties. They have a lot of, trade going backwards and forwards and diplomatic engagements and delegations and blah, blah, blah. So there's a good probability that, there would have been human transmission carrying it to that place. But I don't see that it would have been greater in terms of the numbers of people involved. In other words, increasing the likelihood of infection. I don't think it would have been greater than China's trade with other countries. Yet Iran seemed to suffer very immediately and very heavily. Why is that?
Indeed.
Because they don't like them.
Well, they deliberately had people releasing more of it. If it is a genuine actual thing, if they've had agents going to certain areas, certain countries, and deliberately releasing it so it amplifies the infection rate within that zone.
Yeah, and if you want evidence, like to say, if you want evidence of that being done in the past, there's plenty of it where they've released and admitted in things in the from the 60s and 70s with freedom of information requests and things of this nature coming out, and MK Ultra and things like they admit they do all types of terrible things to the public years later. So that would not surprise me at all that that's what they have been doing, and that's why it spread so quickly. And then they're using it as this, I think it's like a dress rehearsal, like you say, for the bigger, something even more, and just seeing if they can shut down a country even now. It was a state on Saturday night. They announced it was just the state of Lombardy, that region with Milan, 16 million people, like you said, being quarantined. And then just tonight saying about the fact that the whole countries, they want everybody to stay indoors, apart from if you go to work.
As though you've got a higher percentage of catching the virus if you're not attached to a world central bank.
Well, there you go. Yeah, exactly.
And wash your hands.
Yeah, Erdogan, Putin washed their hands before shaking. Look, so didn't they know you're not supposed to shake hands anymore? You're supposed to stay 6 feet apart. But I do think a lot of this and a lot of the narrative has been deliberately stretched out. Like I say, it's going to take a couple of weeks probably here in the UK before they start mentioning or making mention of whether they will or will not start doing quarantines like in Italy. But that stretching out of the time is just giving them the ability to monitor the public's reaction. And, I've seen some evidence of how a lot of the videos that have been pushed around about supermarkets being empty shelves and all that kind of stuff, some of that looks like it's been staged. So we know they do this kind of deliberate media manipulation. So therefore, they're deliberately trying to amplify the concept in the public's mind that you've got to start panicking now. And then they're sitting back and watching to see how many people panic. I think they are using this rollout as a test bed to see how far they can push
Yeah.
And they will push certain things, and once they get them, we will find it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to get them back again. So if they start creating a desire in the public that everybody has to have some kind of medical check every time they go through a port or an airport or a major train station, anything like that, and the public accept it as being, oh, well, this is just the modern world, we've got to worry about all the infection, you're never going to get that removed once they start implementing it. And this is the thing that I think a lot of people don't realise. The system very much relies on I've termed it before as they ask for a mile so that you give an inch. But once you give that inch, you will never get that inch back again. They rely on that gradual accumulation of invading your sovereignty and your self, your personality, even your sense of self-image and everything. They invade that gradually, bit by bit, and they never give it back.
And then give you ridiculous videos of that woman purchasing the toilet. Did you see how many toilet rolls she had? I mean, it was just ridiculous. I don't know if you saw that little clip that was going around a few days ago, literally arguing in the supermarket, and one lady asking her to give her a pack of them.
Just one pack.
One pack, and they're thinking, well, how just a joke, really. I think again, just all the crap coming out, literally crap going on, wiping your ass, bog rolls. They're having a laugh at our expense, it seems, and just being ridiculous.
They want you to laugh at those people, though. They want you to laugh at the poor and the confused that are fighting toilet paper. You know what I mean? The basic necessities.
Well, my old man taught me a good way to save on toilet paper. Yeah, you get your piece of paper like that, right, and you tear a bit off like that. Yeah, and then what you do, you open it out, right. So like you can get your finger right through. Yeah, you can get your finger right through. Yeah, you get this little corner piece. Yeah, and you do under your fingernail with that. Yeah, so there you go. That's the way to save on toilet paper. But I mean, just as an aside here, I know this is a bit impossible, but you go down the waste paper bins, to make paper you need a lot of water. But I mean, people, it's not impossible. Yeah, if you'd have planned ahead, got the right kind of chemicals, you need a big sort of sheet, so you can put the paper goo about 2 millimeters thick, and dry it out. You can make your own paper, I mean, it would be good enough, to sell it as rolls of bog paper.
The thing is, though, you might need that supply of water to actually flush your toilet, because if things get really bad, then your water system's going to stop working. So you might have a mountain of toilet roll, but after a while, your toilet will be full up because you can't flush it because the water supply's been turned off.
Well, it could get like that, because I've just read as well, 3 months people are being told, don't expect the coronavirus panic to go away for about 3 months. Things are going to be disrupted. So
the media says, I know.
They're going to drag it out for the entire year. And I didn't mention it in my general rambling because it's just one of those things that's been part of the main news at some point. It hasn't been the main feature of the news, but it's been mentioned plenty of times, so I'm sure most people are aware of it. Them talking about having a vaccine ready. And the standard response is it takes 18 months. We might have a vaccine by next year, hopefully. And that's been, I think, what the UK government has backed, as in they've agreed with that of like, we'll work on a vaccine, but it could take a year to 2 years. But at the same time, it's been circulated that the Gates Foundation is working on a vaccine, and also scientists in Israel claim they've created a vaccine that could be applicable to everything. So it's like a universal vaccine, and they reckon they'll have a version for COVID-19, for the coronavirus, within 6-7 months, within the next several months.
It's not called CBD, is it, by any chance? Or they've been doing a lot of research on artificial types of CBD. And I think the reason for that is because Yeah, I mean, they can't really patent CBD, so they make this molecule, and it's almost identical. And in fact, I went the other day I was looking up the 3 different CBD prescription things, yeah? One of them says this is CBD, but one of them, Morbital or something, I think it's called, they say, oh, it's an exclusive fucking synthesized CBD. It's not. It's exactly the fucking same. It is CBD. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. But I tell you something that would be really, really interesting. All the people that have come down with this virus, especially the ones that have died, did they have their flu shots? That would be an interesting statistic. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a good inquiry to add to the data to see if there's a correlation between the two. But I don't think you won't ever get that from the system.
No. And the thing is, because I've heard people saying, oh, they put the virus in the flu thing, in the flu vaccine, and then they triggered it with 5G. BS. Impossible. Yeah. But it's not impossible that they could have put something into the flu viruses that makes them accept the little bit of protein that is on the outside of the virus.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I highly recommend.
I spoke last week, yeah, on that KT. Sorry, go on.
I think we mentioned it the last couple of broadcasts, but I would recommend checking out The Conscious Resistance. And he's done 2 or 3 videos. One, the 5G Trojan horse. That's a good encapsulation about 5G tech and the rollout. But also recently, he's done a couple of videos. One of them with James Corbett, where they're talking about the misinformation that is being added in to the questions about 5G and its possible connections to the virus. And interestingly enough, I didn't mention this earlier, that clip that I screen shared of the Sky News package about the infodemic or the misinformation pandemic, that includes and actually references on screen. It shows a clip of a video, you know, that Dana Ashley, who did that viral video recently about the questions about 5G. That was actually featured in their package about misinformation. So this is being very much pushed. This has been added into the narrative deliberately. I think they want to encourage confusion and misinformation about 5G and the potential of what it can and can't do and stuff like that. But it's all being added onto the horseback of the fear that is being pushed around the virus.
Is that Donna any good or not?
I did watch the whole video, and she makes some interesting observations, but really, from my point of view anyway, she wasn't exactly saying anything that other people couldn't have found easily online. You know, she's just talking about things like the 5G enabled systems on the cruise ship and how there is some scientific evidence to show how 5G affects the water molecules in the body, and therefore that could create the same kind of symptoms, or create the same kind of symptomatic response in the body as what they're saying about the virus. If people haven't looked at a lot of information about 5G, then yeah, it's probably worth them watching her video. But she's basically, you know, doing like I often do. She's connecting together a lot of dots, and they don't all necessarily guaranteed go together, but it makes a good, interesting observation of what's going on.
Yeah, one thing I have seen is people saying that the 5G microwaves can disrupt oxygen so that the lungs won't absorb it. I think that is bullshit. Yeah, because one where I saw it, they was talking about it changes the electrons triplet and singlet, and this is not. No, it doesn't. It can't do that. This is ridiculous. You know, because the triplet and the singlet thing is something to do with nuclear magnetic resonance, or it's something to do with the electronic orbitals. But it's just not. They just weren't right. Yeah, what they were saying about the oxygen being changed by the microwave. I mean, it could affect the lungs because there's a lot of water on the surface of the lungs, you know, to keep everything working.
Yeah, I think it's that
But,
it crossed wires, and there is obviously misinformation and deliberately disinformation. But there does seem to be a crossed wires about people either not knowing or not being aware of the fact that 5G is not just one single frequency band, it's a range. And in that range, there is a frequency band, I think it's 60 gigahertz, where it scientifically, provably, it affects water molecules. And because the human body has a lot of water in it, if they concentrated a focus beam at that frequency, then yes, it could have highly detrimental effects because of the way it affects water.
That's
But
2.4.
the industry is well aware of this. It's like I said, it's a scientifically known fact, so therefore it's part of their standards. So I highly doubt that the sale of frequencies will include that particular band, or they'll use the other bands around it. They just won't use that one particular band.
They already do, because 2.45 gigahertz is one of the bandwidths, and they use that in microwave ovens. And the reason they chose it was because it is the wavelength that will heat up water. The most efficiently. And you can increase the efficiency of that even if the water is a little bit salty, because it's the polarization of the water molecule. I've said this before, You don't buzz the atoms. The wave is so big, it's the same size as the molecule itself. And the water molecule is polar, which means it's positive one end and negative at the other. And so the wave catches it and actually
flips it.
Makes the whole molecule turn around, which is why ice doesn't defrost as quickly as it should do in a microwave, because the microwaves go straight through. It has to move the molecule itself to heat it up. So
I've never tried melting ice in a microwave, mate, so I've no idea.
It takes a long time, apparently. I mean, water will heat up much faster. You put a glass of water and a lump of ice in the microwave, the water will boil, and the ice has only just melted a little bit.
See what you're saying there, though, about the disinformation. The control system will be injecting that into the scene intentionally, and then crying about, "Oh, look at all this misinformation out there. We need to come to us to get the prescribed version of events." You know what I mean? And anything else is seen as psychosis or hate.
And again, that in that video package from Sky News, they mention the claims online in the conspiracy internet saying that 5G causes the virus, and the guy with his super hipster looks at the camera and goes, "It's 5G safe, folks." So they're again encouraging people to don't think for yourself, don't investigate, just accept what the authority tells you. The authority tells you it's safe, so shut up and take the vaccine because the authority tells you it's safe.
And if they've got an all-in-one vaccine, as you mentioned just before, coming out, which covers everything, I bet it does. Yeah.
How convenient. How convenient.
Isn't it just? And where was it out of? Israel, did you say?
Yeah.
What a surprise.
I haven't read further into it yet. I don't know whether they mean it acts as like a universal carrier. So they basically just tweak what they need for it to affect whatever virus or illness they're trying to target, or whether they mean it's like a one-shot magic cure-all. I don't know. It wasn't very clear.
There was a story about, I think I mentioned it a few weeks ago on the reality chat, with that headline. I'll have to find it somewhere on my bookmark somewhere, folder.
That might be where I'm remembering it from. Right?
Yeah, and it did say they were working. I don't know if it was Israel. I'm not sure. I'll have to go and check.
I'm pretty sure it was. Yeah, scientists in Israel, they do a lot of genetic research in Israel. Funny that, isn't it? They're so obsessed with being the chosen race, they desperately research genetics so that they can find some kind of proof to prove they're the chosen ones.
I get this sort of thing. Like an emotive topic can be used for censorship. See, like just skirting on the edges there. But this is what I see as well. Just now, a lot of emotive topics, like you like say your Caroline's Law, like say the wee dwarf boy that was getting laughed at, you know. Oh, we can't do that, you know. We've got to be kind. Everybody's got to think the same way, you know. It's like, like you were saying about things that once they're gone away, we can't get them back. And like the totalitarian tiptoe, I just think we need to be very, very vigilant. And now I think there's a big push on for censorship. I think that's what they do. They're using emotive topics, so it's hard to actually argue against the actual case itself, you know.
Yeah.
But when we take it on a wider picture of what's going on,
it seems to be one of their main footings that they use to do that process. They'll create a victim, and they use the victim as the justification, because then you are in a peer pressure sense, you're not allowed to question it, because if you do question, you are somehow being derogatory to the victim that they're using as the justification. So just like the climate change with Greta, you know, you're not allowed to criticize it, because otherwise they accuse you of abusing or bullying a teenager, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's a constant repeated methodology. You can't question the mental health argument, because otherwise you're bullying all those people with mental health, supposedly, allegedly.
Yeah, it's like shutting down. It shuts down freedom of speech eventually and everything, doesn't it? It affects everything. And they use, like you say, they use these particular this subject matter or this particular story, and it's all crafted and it's all deliberate to push it down further down the road, more legislation, more acts to bring in.
They want you to praise China, who provably is a country where if you post a criticism about the authority, they can put you in a metal chair with bars to lock you in, and bars, you know, like handcuffs over your hands, and force you to verbally recant everything you said. This is like the Inquisition.
Yeah.
And they want us to now praise a governmental system that does things like that and uses that kind of panopticon fear effect to suppress its population to such a degree that people put on fake smiles and say, yes, we love the government, because they're so shit scared of what's going to happen to them if they ask any questions. The justification for impressing that mindset onto the public is being based on this outbreak. You know, oh, if you question what the government's doing, then you're a naughty person that wants people to get infected and die from the illness.
Psychosis. You're on about a knee-jerk reaction as well in society, what they're trying to, what sort of engender. The public, I see this getting played out in like the social media. This is where the justice seems to get doled out these days. You know what I mean? There doesn't seem to be like a fucking any due process. You know, it's like that knee-jerk reaction. Like everything's dumbed down, though. Russia is the enemy. You know what I mean? Like fucking, just totally dumbed down bullshit to get a knee-jerk reaction out of the public. You know, and
because Russian bots, therefore you're not allowed to share that link on Facebook. Yeah, it's a simple example of how people can see the censorship in their world, you know, so it's not just like some crazy speculation that they hear online. They can see the effects for themselves. Where Facebook puts the little message saying your link does not correspond with our terms and conditions, or however they word it. Basically, you're not allowed to share that link. Yeah, that's a kind of control structure that they are encouraging the public to actively want. Yeah, I know for a lot of us, it's a matter of accepting that it occurs. Yeah, it's just, this is the way the environment is. You have to deal with it as best you can, allowing for those kind of effects. But for a lot of the public, they're nudging them towards actually desiring that environment. So it's becoming very much a kind of hive mind virus. You know, it's
Right.
another way of looking at a kind of esoteric connection to a lot of this narrative. The hive mind is connecting everybody's crown chakra into a single mind mentality where they are erecting barriers of things that they don't want to see or interact with, and then demanding that the state enforce those barriers. And the state, quite happily, that's exactly what the state wants to be able to do.
Yeah.
Zardos, where everybody can meditate together onto the second level.
The penis is bad.
I watched Zardos today. I don't know why. I just thought, I'll watch that again.
It's quite, I don't know, in a way it is quite appropriate at the moment, isn't it? Yeah, it's back to that kind of apocalypse stuff again.
It's the way they want to, ring fence themselves off, and they think that that'll somehow save them. And of course,
they're living in their ascended reality, supposedly.
The more of those films I watch, in fact, their attitude was very much like the architect in the Matrix. Yeah,
The grand plan.
Yeah.
You can describe it in a Christian theological point of view as it's the classic deception of the ego self. That Luciferian attitude of, you know better than God, so you will create a plan that is perfect and you will supersede God's perfect plan. Yeah.
Oh, that woman, did you see that Canadian woman? Now, I have an announcement. We advise everybody to stop touching your face. And she goes through her notes.
I saw the one with the UK minister, was it Whitty or Watty, his name is? And he was making this statement at an inquiry session. He's saying, like, yes, you know, if you see somebody coughing to their hands, you shouldn't really shake that hand. He's mate, what
did you ever see the Australian snowflake on the train? I mean, this woman, literally, she sat there, and it was just a tiny little cough. And the guy said, "Did you cough at me?" And she said, "No, I coughed in my mouth. I didn't open my mouth." And the bloke goes, "That's disgusting." So she kind of leans towards him and goes, and the guy's like, "Oh my God," and he gets his phone out, he's going to take a phone of her, like, he's going to take a picture of her, like, this is a woman that coughed on the train. Oh.
Is that going to be a new definition? Are we going to have a cough crime? That person coughed in my direction. Quick, call the police. It was a cough crime. Never mind your hate crimes. We now got cough crimes.
Is that the police? Can the virus be carried through human sweat? It can with a man on the train opposite me. Terrible BO. I'm sure if he's got the virus, I'm going to catch it. I mean, he stings the high heaven.
Well, the unfortunate reality is if you can smell it, that means those molecules are actually in your olfactory system. So you've just inhaled some of that person's sweat. Yeah,
apparently, apart from teaching,
so you might as well get on with your day.
But one thing you can do is, condoms, they've all got antiviral. Yeah, the lubrication.
You mean those like all-in-one complete body condoms?
No, just an ordinary condom. I mean, for the mouth and face, instead of chewing gum. Yeah, it's always been an alternative to chewing gum, isn't it?
There's a suggestion for some street theatre. If there's anyone out there that does that kind of thing, you do a bit of culture jamming, find out where the next news broadcast is going to be from. Just get one of those all-in-one body condoms and just go and shuffle about in the background beyond the news reporter.
James Starley's on it as we speak.
Anyway, I think that's enough ranting about the same old subject that's in the news at the moment. But like what I said on, I think it was Wednesday, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Even though there's a lot of questions, I have a lot of questions about this entire narrative. That doesn't deny the reality that we are now seeing effects in everyday life. You're seeing effects within your society, and there will be more to come. So not talking about it and ignoring it and just calling it all distraction and whatever, to me, is no, I can't do that. I try and avoid being distracted into silliness by the spin and propaganda that they put out there, but I'll still talk about the subject, because I think it's very relevant and important to a lot of what's going on at the moment. So I'm sorry if you're fed up hearing about it, but we were talking about it again. Hello to everyone in the chat room. I'm sorry I haven't been reading through the chat, so I hope you've all been being nice to each other and being excellent to each other. Be excellent to each other. I think I said hello to all of you in the chat room. Apart from Paula. Hello, Paula. Hope you're feeling well. And I'm sure I saw Krishna in there earlier as well. I hope you're doing all right, mate. Not working too hard. I'm scrolling down as quick as I can. I can't see the entire chat room, unfortunately, the way this thing works. But hello to everyone. If you have joined in the chat room, thank you. If you're just tuning in and watching and listening, hello, Soul Bollocks. It is indeed Soul Bollocks. I see Soul Bollocks in the chat. But if you're just tuning in and listening in, watching, whatever, hello as well. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for giving us your attention for a couple of hours or so. Please try not to get feared out by all the stuff that's happening in the news. That's part of what they want out of you. They want you to be just confused and anxious and desperate and panic buying. But at the same time, give some consideration to, do you have some stock in your cupboard? You know, do you have some supplies that will last you for a short period of time? If you require medication, have you got a supply of your medication? Things like that. Don't let it become a panic effect before you start doing something about it. And don't rely on the government being there to save you, because they possibly won't be. Hopefully they will be, and everything will be great, and it'll all be sorted soon, and we will be going to summer. It'll be spring soon. We're not exactly reliable. But thanks, folks. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, guys, for joining in. We'll be back again on Wednesday night on the Reality Chat channel. And Steve should be on Thursday night with the Mystery Show on his channel, Steve the Goose channel. And I'm sure Jesse will be doing some live streams. It's probably on tonight at some point. He usually does Monday nights.
It's on now.
Yeah, I was going to say he's been on.
I thought it might be. Yeah. So keep thinking, keep talking, and thanks again for tuning in, folks. I'll see you again soon. Catchies. I'm going to click the button. Did I click the button? Or is it just lagging?
Raconteurs on as well.
Oh, Raconteurs.